Since the last St. Michael's Conference, when I presented last year's update of our Teolodamus supplement project, and I had on display several sections of the book, we now have all of Teolodamus put together into one section of over 750 pages. Here it is. Anyone?
How many years' work, Dr. Running?
9 years. Okay. This we prepared for proofers and to show our publisher, Catholic Book Publishing Company, recommended to us by Evan Scanlon. Also, since last September's conference, an article about Teolodamus appeared in the winter edition of the Classical College magazine, at the end of which I asked for volunteers to proof our pre-publication copy. I did not anticipate that 32 would respond to my request. Teolodamus, this hymnal supplement, is edited by me, the chairman, and by Reverend Jesse Kruzmark, the music engraver, a graduate of our Fort Wayne Seminary and an LCMS pastor in Minnesota, and by Matthew Carver, our layout designer and translation advisor, an LCMS layman, well known to us for his translating and editing of Walther's hymnal, published by CPH, and for translating many other historic liturgical documents. Teolodamus is funded by the Protestant Conference, an independent study group of mostly Lutherans, several of which hold membership in the LCMS congregations, clergy and lay people that share a common interest in biblical and Reformation studies and the Reformation chorale. Because of their heavy interest in the Reformation, this hymnal supplement includes all 36 hymns associated with Luther, plus his setting of the Te Deum and the Great Litany, 29 Gerhard hymns, and 45 other Reformation-era hymns. And because Protestants have a high regard for Martin Franzmann, who was one of my professors at the St. Louis Seminary, and who had many edifying associations with the Protestants, and was a featured speaker at several of their conferences, this supplement includes 14 Franzmann hymns. And because of this group's love also of the classics, the book includes 22 early Latin hymns, due primarily to the influence of Dr. Carl Springer, who attends Protestant conferences, is a member of an LCMS congregation, and who is on the planning committee of our Fort Wayne Seminary's classical conferences. Since this hymnal is intended as a supplement, most of the above that I mentioned are not found in any other current hymnals. Besides a total of 175 hymns, Teolodamus includes the Divine Service setting by E. Willen and Reformation settings of Matins and Vespers, also not found in any other current hymn book, and all 150 psalms and the propers intervenient chants, all set to the Gregorian psalm tones. All of the above we put into a plastic spiral bound pre-publication proof copy and sent it to 32 volunteers to prove, 29 of which sent back extensive reviews with compliments, constructive criticisms, typo corrections, and suggestions. During the last 3 months, I have been carefully reading and analyzing these 29 returns and have collated into work orders for Matthew and Jesse what we need to correct, add, or change. We're so grateful to these 29 respondents, one of which is a university librarian, 2 of which are respected musicologists, several of which are liturgical scholars, some pastors and some laymen, all of whom love the church and its worship traditions and want this supplement to reflect our heritage in the most responsible and practical, useful way. Among the proofers' requests are, in addition to LSB translations of the Gloria Patri, include the TLH translations, since both our Psalter and our propers use the King James Version translations of the Bible. And for the will and setting of the divine service, include the sung settings of the Nicene Creed and the Lord's Prayer, Willen himself included. The melody of the creed Willen used was from the Missa de Angelis, and I'm naming it the Father Charles MacLean Memorial Setting because he was the one proofer who was relentlessly insistent we include it. By the way, since this conference is giving major emphasis to the Te Deum, we be aware that Te Laudamus includes two settings of this canticle: Luther's very reverent, meditative, chant-like setting, and Willen's majestic, soaring, festive setting. There's much more, but my time is up, and this is enough of an update for now. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to be with you, many of you who I know and some of you I've served with over the years. Since July 15th, I've been president of Concordia University's system. We're so thrilled. Mark Braden is chairman of that board and doing a phenomenal job with that. We just had a meeting last week. As many of you may know, we just called Reverend Dr. Douglas Patel to be vice president of CGUS. And Doug has started as of the 11th of this month. And we're just thrilled. I want to answer a question that continually gets asked, especially here in the state of Michigan. And that is, why Lutheran identity on our Concordia campuses? For us as Lutherans, we take for granted the three great Reformation solas: Sola Gratia, Sola Scriptura, and Sola Fides. And I think ultimately, to a world who is blind, deaf, and dumb to the Word of God, it is up to us, the Lutheran Church, to remain faithful to these Reformation declarations. It is more important also for us to understand, if we do not remain faithful, who will? Lutheran identity is not a measure of orthodoxy. I get so tired of listening to people talk about the limos as a measure of orthodoxy. It is not a measure of orthodoxy. It is simply who we are. And we ought not be ashamed nor embarrassed of it. Having just completed my campus visitations, which is not the informal visits or the formal visits, I can say to you that our Concordias as a whole are in very good shape. Now, each one to a different degree. 3 of the 5 Concordias have seen an uptick in enrollment this fall. 2 of our 5 Concordias have seen a steady. And to be very frank with you, to my surprise, 175 freshmen at the Ann Arbor campus, given what's going on at the Ann Arbor campus. And that truly is an amazing thing if you think about it, given all that's gone on with that. It is important. We have 5 presidents of our 6 campuses that are dedicated to Lutheran identity, to a man. And I can tell you, having met with each of them independently and privately, we are blessed with the presidents that we have. Now, I've said this often in public settings, and I'll say it here. You might not agree with what a president or a board of regents is doing on their particular campus, but I assure you that our presidents are focused and directed to being Lutheran in an ungodly society. And what does that mean? That means we are not ashamed to stand up for the unity of our worship. Reverend Dr. Douglas Patel was just charged by the board last week to head a subcommittee on chapel worship. And effectively what we will do is draw a box, and we will ask our universities to live within that box, which is no different than the box that we live in as parishes. As bishop for 9 years in the English district, I can tell you, having visited every congregation multiple times, that while there is a variance in many places, there is much more uniformity, I would say, in the purpose of the liturgy and the use of it. We cannot take the anomalies and make them normative to everything. And I would say, I just had 2 conversations this week with respected brothers about this topic on our Concordias. Each chapel that I have worshiped in over the last 2 months has lived with what I consider to be in the box of our church liturgy on our college campuses. And so I leave you with very simply this: The CUS is strong, and we will not go into that quiet night without some noise and some joy, because our Concordias are the jewel of our church. They quoted me at the Reporter as saying, and I will stand behind it, that our campuses are our greatest place for evangelism when we are proclaiming the gospel to people who are actively against it. And I tell you the truth, we have good people doing this job on the Concordia campuses throughout the U.S. Thank you for your faithfulness, and thank you for the time.
I think that will be all the editors in the room. And we're going to allow some of the questions that were kind of quelled earlier when we cut that section short. If you'd like to ask a question to the panel, please feel free to do that. And what we'll do is we'll take the question, we'll just pass the mic down the row. So first question, please. Father Roland, I skipped him, and please go ahead.
I always have a question. You know that. Let's not try to make it a question. What can the seminaries actually do? Can they put something out on a regular basis to bring this unity back together, to encourage it step by step? What does a pastor do when he goes to a winkle where everybody else is doing something else? And he's the only guy there that's doing Divine Service 3, according to the traditional Lutheran hymnals that we've had. What do you do?
So, thank you, Father Roland. Since this is a panel, I'm going to give an answer first and then pass the mic to Dr. Russ. But we have 3 seminarists from Fort Wayne with us. And the kind of men that are
together.
Seminary,
Go ahead.
I'm sure this is true also at St. Louis.
I'll work
But
with
that's
them.
going to change our standard. And I think that's a big step in the right direction. So I'll pass it to Dr.
Thank you. Your question is, how do we prepare guys going into the field to deal with these really ambiguous situations?
We're already out there.
Yeah. So at Fort Wayne, I can't speak St. Louis. We, for the last 2 years, we really ramped up on something we're calling mentoring. And a group of 8 to 10 young men, young and old, in the seminary, get attached to one faculty member. That faculty member is a mentor. The way that I've used my mentoring group, and the way that I know a couple of other of my colleagues have used their mentoring group, is actually to put on kind of a practice winkle, or we live in our mentoring group as if it's a winkle. And you know as well as I do that there's a diversity of opinion and background that comes in the seminary, no matter how you cut it. And I think the 3 guys who are here from Fort Wayne could attest to that very fact. So what do you do? I mean, and I think this is the thing. You open up space, and it sounds therapeutic. It's not. You open up space where people can talk frankly about their practice and theology. And in that space where they can talk about their practice and theology, all practice and theology can then be encountered, affirmed, corrected in a situation like I'm describing. And so what I'm trying to do is show the guys the kind of things that you can do in a winkle to open the space to have good, productive, forward-moving, backward-looking, and fontes-looking discussion on theology. And maybe the guys can, like Hyles, right?
If I can just add one thing, and then I'll let the other panelists respond. We also have a 4th year and 3 seminary students from the Ann Arbor campus with us who loves the liturgy and desire to serve at Zion. So even coming through our Concordias, that's very encouraging. Other panel members? Take another question, please.
I have Dr. Bruss's outline here. My question is going to pertain to points 16 and 17, in which he references the 1847 LCMS Constitution about the exclusive use of doctrinally pure church books, etc., and the necessity of pastors using those and they must be under open protest if they're going to have to use an unorthodox hymnal, that kind of thing. So my daughter is 8 years old. She plays soccer. I am the referee for the team. Both teams are always coached to follow the rules, but they do not follow the rules. So my job as the referee, which I'm very good at, mind you, I blow the whistle when I see a rule infraction. If I do not blow that whistle, they will continue to break the rules as that game goes on, and it'll become a big mess. If a parent's on the sideline and they are chirping, I walk over to them and I say, you will either be silent or you will leave the field. And they obey. So is that not the role of a bishop in the church? And my question then implies, is about the synodical constitution and orthodoxy of hymn books and its relationship to the bishop. And is it the bishop that must be the one to blow the whistle and to tell people when they are outside of the rules to follow them?
Okay, so Father Ball has the question about Article 2 and how that relates to the role of the bishop in the overseeing of the church.
Yeah.
And the metaphor he used was of girls' soccer. Thank you, Father Ball.
Actually, it would be great if Bishop Hardy were here. Or he left, didn't he? All the guys I want to have talk are gone. No, that's clearly the case. And so, is it a relinquishment or a failure on the part of the bishops of the church not to call these things out? It absolutely is. And I can tell you, in places where it's happening, it's working. So I concur 100% with you.
I'd like to speak just a moment on behalf of our bishops. The bishops sometimes know things that we don't. Those of you who have been involved with call processes may have seen a name disappear from a call list and ask, gee, why would that name be off? The bishop may not be at liberty to comment because there's a pastoral issue with that member or that person. So bishops sometimes are in possession of information we don't have, and I think we put the best construction on their decisions. Another question, Father Zeiler, please.
Yeah.
This is more of a philosophical one. Ignorance limits my freedoms. I once went to an interview and the guy said, okay, you're free to go. I didn't know where the exit was. I went to a family for a funeral and the funeral director said, whatever you want. They had no idea what they wanted. It was my job to present the good things from Lutheran liturgy and hymnody and practices for this funeral. Now, it seems to me to promote freedom in the synod, we have to promote knowledge of what is good and excellent. What is the knowledge that we are lacking that needs to be promoted by our seminaries, by our bishops, by our pastors?
Okay, so the question at its base is ignorance limiting freedom.
Yes.
And Father Peterson, we'll start with you, pass it down. We're gonna have to go to the phone. I'm sorry. As far as
Well, I agree. This is the old Lutheran answer, but we really have such a doctrinal weakness. And that's why we do have to start with the sort of principles and so forth. But it's almost unending what we don't know, right? The difference between God is love and love is God, right? And just on and down it goes. And I think probably I liked actually everything Russ said. But I was particularly struck by that repetition. It took a long time to get into this mess. It's going to take a long time to get out. And as I've been harping on for a long time, I think we've got to start taking teaching more seriously. And by that, I do not mean Bible class, right? You've just got to jettison the idea that we're going to teach in Bible class, because that is the lie that has kept us from teaching for the last 60 years. We've got to teach in the sermons. And I think we've got to have doctrinal sermons, didactic sermons. We got to have brass tacks kinds of stuff. It's not enough to tell people, go tell people about Jesus. We have to actually give them examples and encouragements. This is how you do it. This is how you have a spiritual conversation around the coffee pot at work. This is because that's what we haven't done, I think. So it's sort of related to my abstract question earlier too. I think we've got to just teach more, and it's going to be a slow process, is my sense.
Yeah, I will take Father Ziley's question as an opportunity to express what I've been thinking about ever since Dr. Bruss's lecture. And this is no reflection on you. I love the lecture. But it occurred to me that there was something missing. And I think what's missing, at least as I see it right now, is what is actually in the Lutheran sources from the 16th century about uniformity. The uniformity, it seems to me, that we want to seek is not just the uniformity of practice, but of doctrine. And that gets me back to the question of information. We want to be uniform in what we believe, and the way we express that belief is going to be a reflection of it. So if you worship with, cowboy boots that are full of mud at the altar, you can't tell me that you agree with me, because I would never dream of doing that. So while it's an adiaphoron, whether or not I'm going to kneel at the altar, it's kind of hard for me not to, knowing what I believe, that Christ is there. My good friend John Stevenson is noted for saying, "You would stand before the incarnate one." And I think that when we talk about uniformity, we need to be talking about why. What it is that we believe that requires us, that compels us to worship the way we do. Lex orandi, lex credendi. And I think that needs to be especially taught to our seminarians. The question why has to be asked and answered. So,
Father B, did you want to make a comment on that?
Well, kind of back to what we were talking about authority, I keep coming back to the fact that we do have a system of oversight. And I know that we have to be patient. I know we have to be loving. I know we have to be cognizant of it took a long time to get where we are now. But there are some things that are so egregious, like when the words of institution are sung by the praise band, and the pastor is already munching on the pop-top communion thingy before the girls even finish singing the words of institution. And this is on the internet, and it's in the open, and everybody knows about it, and nothing is done about it. And what that does is that gives permission to everybody else that wants to do whatever they want. And sometimes I think maybe we do need a really strict, make an example out of somebody to show them there are lines. I know the lines can be blurry. I know the lines are complicated, but there are some lines that just ought to never be crossed. And that is the job of our district presidents. And if they won't do it, it's the job of the synod president. It's hard. Oversight is hard. Pastoral oversight is hard. But they have the job. They have the authority. And I think there are some times where they do need to be called upon to do it.
if I could just make a little postscript in connection with what I just said after what you said. I think that the reason these things are egregious has to be stated. It's an affront and offense to our faith, the way these things are being handled. It offends my faith. And so that maybe that answers the question of what I thought might have been missing in the materials we cited. It's not really missing, it's there. But it's there in the fact that the Lutherans, especially Luther, that you quoted in early parts of your presentation, was offended, personally offended by some of the things that were going on.
Why was he offended? Not because they're different, but because they said something about Jesus that he just could not abide. Can I just respond to Father Bean here real quick? I agree 100% with you. And I'm going to turn it back out to everybody here, right? I mean, if you come upon a situation like this, what is your obligation as a pastor? You do have an obligation. Have a conversation with the guy, first off, right? Next step, there is a grievance. I don't know, what's it called? What's the grievance process called in the synod? You know that. Dispute resolution, right?
About 10 years.
Well, sure it does. Okay, but how is the DP going to find out about it? Or
Read Gottesdienst.
you can't do everything, but you know, I do think that there again, we're all in this together. We all have a responsibility, and I concur that the leaders need to exercise their authority, but we also have an obligation in this thing.
You've said a lot of things that are easy to agree to. There are certain things we just should not do. There are lines of authority. My question is to do with sort of the reality of our LCMS church structure, wherein the congregations own themselves and govern themselves. And that can put a certain hindrance on exercises of authority by the bishops or district presidents, by circuit visitors, and by pastors. Could you just speak a little to that particular detail of our church context, please?
So in the context of, to repeat for the recording, in the context of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod,
Wherein congregations are self-governing and
with the
hold their own
Waltherian governance,
Yeah.
right? How is this brought to bear?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, very good. So I'll open that up to the panel. We have 3 minutes. Okay. Let's try to move on.
Sorry, this isn't a particularly theological response, but freedom suffers abuse. And so, I mean, I think this is important. The history of Lutheranism is the history of bad bishops. We're throwing around the word bishop, and I'd love in some ways for that nomenclature to come back. But at the same time, let's recognize that in the history of the church, bishops have tended to be tyrants, right? And so it's not as though that's just some sort of solution to these issues. It's just it's a risk. We have to have, for example, with closed communion, it is biblically necessary that there is pastoral care and exception for extreme circumstances. The problem is that reality, which we cannot give up, is subject to abuse. And some people will make an exception for every sin. It's not an exception, right? They're just doing it. But the response to that is to live in the Soviet Union, right? So we have to suffer in the United States of America libel. There's no libel in the Soviet Union because there's no freedom of the press, which is a better system. In some ways, it's hard to live with freedom, but I think, you know, this is not quite as terrible as it might seem. I think that, you know, this is the way we kind of tend to complain because it's what we're suffering under. But I suspect it'd be far worse if we were in the Roman Church, right, living under actually tyrannical bishops that were doing. So, I mean, I'm complaining probably more than anybody else in this room about this stuff daily. But I think some of that is kind of, maybe we should embrace some of it and say, you know, we're going to endure this because it's better actually this way.
Thank you, Father. We're gonna have to wrap for time, but Father Peterson just gave me an idea for a conference. Bishop Stefan.
Yeah.